Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's take a step back here. Let's look at some true statements. 1. Bernie's chances of winning the Democratic nomination will probably be all but decimated tomorrow. I think he can make up more than 100 delegates in California in the best case. I don't think he can make up more than 200. So a split is not good enough. He has to win. He has to make up delegates. 2. That does not, however, mean that Bernie is obligated to suspend his campaign on the near inevitability of a loss. He has claimed that everybody should get the right to vote their conscience, and who can truly argue with that? Number 3. The United States is not a two-party system by law. If you scroll through this page, I think you'll see more than enough of an argument that he should run outside the Democratic Party. Some arguments. 1, there's the close primaries where he's probably actually winning, but where his supporters can't vote for him. 2, there's obvious signs of vote tampering, like stuffed early ballots. 3, there's voter suppression tactics. And 4, there's the distribution of the vote. I mean, he signed a pledge, fine. Has the party lived up to his side of it? I think there's an argument that it hasn't. 4, therefore tomorrow's vote is not necessarily definitive or final. I think he should have bailed on the Democrats months ago, but at this point he might as well wait until June before he does. Tomorrow may technically close the door, but it was a trap door in the first place. I've stated repeatedly that he never really had a serious chance. And if you think he did, then you were out to lunch, right? So the facade may end, but the candidacy may not, and I would argue should not. Some polls would help. What happens when Clinton, Trump, and Sanders all run? If you want to know, then you have to measure it, right? That's empirical-based thinking. I'm a big fan of that. But I think that, my analysis is that I think you can split the field. Let's split the Republicans into 5 parts. First part is you have evangelicals. You've got Clinton. The evangelicals, I think, will probably split between Clinton and Trump. Because, on the one hand, you've got this sort of pull by the Republican Party on evangelicals, right? Evangelicals have been taught their whole lives that you vote for the Republicans. And for most evangelicals that are alive today, it really is their whole lives, right? But when you put a situation where you've got Clinton versus Trump, the reality is that Clinton is a far better candidate for evangelicals. And I think that most evangelicals are going to realize that pretty quickly. So I think that a lot of them will move to Clinton. And you saw some of the polling in Utah, right? Utah it's not evangelicals exactly. It's Mormons, but it's the same basic logic. Maybe if anything, I would say that in Utah they're a little bit quicker, right? They're a little bit smarter, and it's just gonna they picked it up faster. I think that what you saw in Utah is what you will see elsewhere in the country. It'll take a little bit longer to happen, right? And you will see Clinton pick up a wide swath of the evangelical vote because she's a better candidate for them. Trump is a total nihilist, right? But Clinton is actually, in fact, very religious. And if you look at her policies very carefully, she's better on abortion. If you're an evangelical, you would prefer Clinton over Trump on abortion because Clinton is clear. She's said that she wants a constitutional amendment to limit abortion rights. Similarly on gay marriage, Trump is not really clear at all, whereas Clinton is okay. She doesn't like it, but she acknowledges the ability of the Supreme Court's decision kind of thing, right? On issue after issue, if you're an evangelical, you might not be, really peachy keen on Clinton. You might prefer Cruz, but Clinton versus Trump, Clinton's a better choice because Clinton is more conservative. Okay, then you've got the rich bastards, and I think they'll move mostly to Clinton. The reason I think that Clinton will do very well with rich assholes is that it's the education level, right? You might get your odd Beverly hillbilly that'll go for Trump sort of thing, but broadly speaking, rich people aren't. A lot of the times their kids are stupid, but then probably most of them aren't going to vote anyways. The actual, people that make the money or control the money, most of them are not stupid, and they're going to have a hard time voting for Trump just because they're not gonna like the idea of him having his fingers on the button, even if he doesn't really actually have his finger on the button. And I mean, it's legitimate, right? It's this is what I'm trying to get across is that it's less a question of ideology or even a question of class, and more just a question of intelligence. Um, and so a lot of that wealth is going to look at Trump and they're just going to be like, no, there's no way, right? And so they're either going to move to Clinton or they're just going to not vote, right? Libertarians. I think libertarians will move very strongly to Sanders, because Trump. I think Trump he had a real open with libertarians, but he's closed it. Um, Libertarians are going to want someone that has a strong record, right? So all of this, flip-flopping, dithering from Trump. And, I've actually read a few articles that suggest that Trump's inability to take a firm position is an asset. It might be if he was running on the left, you know, and if he wasn't so haphazard about it, right? Personally, myself as a voter, as a a very far to the left of center voter, I'm not going to flip out if somebody changes their position based on evidence, right? So, if a study is released tomorrow that proves without a doubt that global warming is nonsense, well, I'm going to want to, you know, follow the science, right? And if people change their minds based on, the newest evidence that's available, I'm not going to flip out on that, right? In fact, I'm going to stick with the side that is more evidence-based. But Trump, the way Trump flip-flops, it's just like on a dime with no reason. His if he does have reasoning, it's often hard to follow. Libertarians are not going to stick with that, even if he comes out. It's too late. I don't think there's anything Trump can do to win the libertarian vote. They're not gonna. When there's a better candidate like Sanders, who is very liberal, and because he's very liberal, he's very libertarian, it's very hard to see what Trump could possibly do to pull those people back when he's completely unclear on everything under the sun, right? Then you've got the white working class. They ought to mostly move to Sanders, but there's reasons why they might prefer Trump. We all know those reasons. Let's not really kind of get into that. Let's say it splits. And then you have fiscal conservatives, and I think that fiscal conservatives might have some upsides to Clinton if they really pay close attention to the history. They might realize that Clinton's not such a bad choice if you're a fiscal conservative. Her husband was very fiscally conservative and did a lot of things that should appeal to fiscal conservatives, although due to the groupthink mentality on the right, didn't. And this is I've been over this over and over again as well. Democrats will never win fiscal conservatives. That's the thing, right? It doesn't matter what they do. Fiscal conservatives will never vote for the Democrats under any circumstance, ever. Okay? Look at the history. Look at what Reagan did to the debt, and then look at what Clinton did. Look at what Bush did to the debt. But fiscal conservatives, they stick with the Republicans. They don't really. Maybe something might change, when the boomers die. But for this cycle, fiscal conservatives are going to stick with the right, and there's no amount of argumentation, there's no amount of evidence, there's no amount of logic, there's nothing you can do to swing them. Okay? They will stay with the Republicans. In fact, at the end of the day, it might be the only base that Trump controls is fiscal conservatives. Despite that not making any sense, he'll probably bankrupt the country. Okay, but they don't. There doesn't seem to be anything you can do to convince them. They were like brainwashed in the 70s or something. I don't know what happened. I think that would be a great case study. Why is it that fiscal conservatives continue to vote for the Republicans, despite all evidence suggesting they should vote for the Democrats? All evidence suggests that the Democrats are by far the more fiscally conservative party, and have been for decades. It's the same thing in Canada, okay? The conservatives are terrible with money. The last conservative government created, I think the number was over $1 trillion in tax giveaways. And we're talking like handouts, right? Like welfare checks, stuff, like tax credits for anything you can think of. Okay, so the government is handing out or sending out checks on a monthly basis to almost everybody. It's the conservatives that set it up, and the liberals hate it. The liberals are trying to get rid of it, right? Look at what Reagan did to what Reagan did to defense spending is outrageous, but they keep voting for it, right? And actually, if you actually look at it carefully and you understand it, Reagan's massive defense spending was Keynesian, right? It was purely Keynesian in nature. Let's spend all this money on defense in order to create jobs. I mean, it was also to scare the Russians, and it worked. It scared the hell out of the Russians. The Russians walked out of the Reagan administration with the conclusion that the Americans were no longer rational. And that's why they stood down, because they concluded that they can't do game theory with the Americans anymore because the leadership is not making rational decisions. It was that much, and yet fiscal conservatives actually put a Republican Congress in place, spent the whole 90s fighting against the Clintons, who were very conservative, fiscally speaking, at the very least, and then put Bush back in power, who did the same thing. There's no logic to it, okay, but it's immovable. They don't budge. Like I say, it would be an amazing study in propaganda, because whatever it was that was done to make the baby boomers think the Republicans are fiscally conservative should be emulated. That should be studied to death and understood, because it is the most effective propaganda that I'm aware of, and it's completely wrong, and everything that's happened over their entire lives has demonstrated that this is wrong. And if they had the slightest ability to think for themselves, the slightest ability of critical thinking, they would realize that if you're a fiscal conservative, you should vote for the Democrats. It should be as clear as day. The slightest level of critical thinking would bring them there. Okay? But whatever happened in the 70s, during the Reagan movement, or whatever it was, like I say, I don't know exactly what happened. I would love to read that book. But whatever happened has been so effective that they will go to their grave voting Republican on fiscal issues, despite it making no sense at all. Okay? Trump could, I mean, look at the wall he wants to build. John Oliver did an interesting report on this, just dealing with the finances of the wall. Like, he's gonna bankrupt the country on simply the wall will bankrupt the country. All right, and that's before you get to the point of ridiculous tax and he's like, to me, that's the reason you don't vote for Trump, is because of the fiscal side. I agree with him on the trade thing. I agree with him on the isolation issues. And I don't think he's any worse on most social issues than his competitor, if his competitor is Clinton. I think that on social issues, Clinton versus Trump is a wash. He's better on trade, he's better on foreign policy, but he's terrible on fiscal issues. He's going to bankrupt the country, like, in a way that has not been seen before. Probably going to crash the dollar. Like the economic catastrophe that is Trump is hard to imagine. Okay, you like we're not talking Bush level catastrophe. We're talking like Weimar Republic level catastrophe. Okay, we're talking like total economic collapse. And that's why you don't vote for him. Even if you take the Bernie or bust position that maybe that's the only thing we can do, right? We're not winning elections. Maybe we need to let the system collapse before we can rebuild it. But there's no question that, he's gonna decimate the economy, right? But he'll get all the fiscal conservatives to vote for him, anyways. And if he manages to win and run for a second term with record levels of debt, the fiscal conservatives will still vote for him. Because the Democrats want to raise taxes. That's the one base that he'll hold just because he has the R beside his name. Everyone else may abandon him, but fiscal conservatives will vote Republican until, the day of the rapture, despite all evidence, or at least baby boomers will. We'll have to see if whatever it was that was done to create this, cult-like devotion of fiscal conservatives to the Republican Party, dissolves in the face of evidence at some point on the death of these goddamn boomers. These fucking boomers. We'll be so much better off when they're gone. Okay. But yeah. That's probably really all that's left, are those fiscal conservatives. Yes, it's a function of how poorly Trump fits into the Republican Party. Granted. But Trump is probably looking at numbers in the 30s regardless. And it's those fiscal conservatives, that's it. In a three-way race, Sanders will probably bleed enough from Trump to pull him closer to 30. And maybe even in the high 20s. Because he'll actually pull some of them. I consequently think that a three-way race like this becomes Sanders versus Clinton in most of the country, with Trump falling to third place. Okay. What happens is that Sanders becomes the Democratic nominee, Clinton becomes the Republican nominee, and Trump gets pushed off into obscurity. That's what I think happens in a three-way race like that. Okay. Is that Republicans end up voting for Clinton, Democrats end up voting for Sanders, and Trump gets lost in the wash. But some evidence, some polls, some data would really help. And just to add to that, this is a video that was trending of Ann Coulter debating with libertarians. The person that put the video up claims that Ann Coulter is making some good points against libertarians. I've yet to see Ann Coulter make a good point. I think that it rather demonstrates the opposite. See, the exchange that you'll see in this video is the reason that Bernie does better than Clinton against Trump and Cruz. Because there's a lot of people that want to vote Republicans, or that have historically voted Republican, or their family has, or their ideas are historically aligned with the right or whatever, but are just not on the side of this kind of invasive conservatism. Um, and she tries to change the subject. So it's okay if the state makes, interferes in your personal decisions. What you really want to, focus on is the state not interfering in economic decisions, so that corporations can interfere in your life instead of the state. It's, her arguments are not very good. They are the kind of thing that will confuse a kind of an entry-level anarchist. And a lot of the anarchists on the right, people that call themselves anarchists, a lot of these right libertarians have not really thought their way through this, right? To put it another way, it seems like Ann Coulter's concept of right libertarianism is objectivism. She seems to think that they're, Ayn Rand types, rather than actual, classical liberals, right? And you might expect that from somebody that's kind of a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, not really, knowing what an actual libertarian is, being kind of confused by the right's perverted spin on libertarianism, right? And in truth, Trump should be kicking himself, because he could have and probably wanted to try and get a lot of these voters. I think that Trump is himself, broadly speaking, a libertarian, but the party's been pushing all of this shit down, and he's blown it. He has, well, he probably will attempt to try to get these voters back, but he's not going to. He's already, as I pointed out, if libertarianism is anything, it is a thought process. It's a way to think. And it kind of, Trump can sway certain types of voters by bouncing around all over the place or not taking a position or confusing people. He can't win libertarians that way. Libertarians need a process, they need a thought, they need an argument, because they're liberals, right? It's less, libertarianism isn't less about outcomes, it's less about results, and it's more about process, right? It's not pragmatic, it's idealistic. And somebody like Trump, who is entirely, purely, 100% pragmatic, okay, will never understand that. Okay, he'll think that, he can just say whatever he wants, confuse them. No, he needs to have the right way of thinking, right? In a sense, they're almost like Buddhists. It's the right path, the right thinking, the right way, right? And so you'll have libertarians that will disagree with each other dramatically on outcomes, but they'll belong to the same movement because they have the same way of thinking, right? That's why you have these right libertarians and these left libertarians, and we will, more often than not, make allies of each other. We'll argue about economics until we're blue in the face, but on a lot of things we will align, and it's because we have the same way that we think, right? We have the same idealism, even if our end results are so dramatically different. Right? And Coulter wouldn't understand that either, because she's a pragmatist as well. In fact, she'll insult you as being a liberal, and okay, that's fine. I guess I guess we'll have to go our separate ways, and there's no tears shed. Okay, but this is the reason, and Trump's gonna have a hard time winning an election in November if he can't control the libertarians, and well, if it's Trump versus Clinton, they may decide that Clinton is so terrible that Trump is worth a try. But that's about the only way that Trump is going to hold on to them. The point is that that's why Sanders does so much better than Clinton, right? Because Clinton is terrible, Trump is terrible, but Sanders is actually pretty good if you're a libertarian.